Standard Combat Series, Series Rules, version 1.8. Introduction. The Standard Combat Series games enable both experienced and beginning players to enjoy simple-to-play and quick-to-learn games. These games attempt to bring out common wargame themes, terms, and techniques. Note about version 1.8. These rules contain known errata and new clarifications since the publishing of 1.7. How to learn rules. Games are meant to be enjoyable pastimes, not tedious tests. In order to learn this game, begin by lightly reading the rules and thumbing through the game's component parts. Don't memorize anything. Punch out a few units from both sides and set them up on the map in any desired fashion. Now, with the rules in hand, follow the sequence of play, rereading as needed. Once you are moving along with your random game and rarely have to look things up, set up the real game and give it a try. By this time, the terminology should be well under control, and you will be able to play any SCS game with little additional effort. The components. The map. The hex numbering system. The numbering system identifies individual hexes on the map. If the game uses more than one map, letters identify the map in question. A hex number pertaining to a given map will begin with that map's letter, as in A10. The digits, A10.10. Got it. The digits before the decimal point indicate the hex row, reading along the map's horizontal dimension from left to right. The digits after the decimal identify the exact hex along the given hex row, reading along the vertical dimension from bottom to top. Not all hexes have printed numbers, but the numbering applies to all of them. Each fifth hex, for example, XX.05, XX.10, XX.15, has a printed hex number to create grid lines. For example, to find hex 29.17, follow the grid line for XX.15 until you find the 29.XX hex row. Then count 2 hexes to 29.17. Map edge hexes. Only hexes with at least half of the hex showing are playable. Destroy units forced off the map. Okay, I think it makes sense to review what this looks like on an actual map. So I'm going to bring up the map for Rostov 41, and we can see what that looks like. So, hex row. So if I look here, the hex row would be, I would think, from bottom to top, right? Reading along the map's horizontal dimension from left to right. The digits after the decimal identify the exact hex along the given hex row, reading along the vertical dimension from bottom to top. Okay, so I think what that means is that okay, right. So the first number is reading from left to right. So I would call that the column. And the second number is I would call that the row. The exact hex along the given hex row, reading along the vertical dimension from bottom to top. Okay, so they refer to the up, down, right? The vertical dimension. Along the given hex row. Okay, to me that's bizarre. They're calling these vertical columns, they're calling that the hex row, which is bizarre to me. Maybe different maps have the numbering differently. Or maybe this map was like intended to be oriented horizontally or something. But whatever, it doesn't really matter. The numbering doesn't really matter. And so every fifth hex has a printed hex number to create grid lines. Okay, so the basic idea is here, you have 1420, you count up one, so that's 14, 21, 22, 23, 24, and then 14, 25. Whereas this is, you know, the 13th, you know, whatever you would call it, column or row. Got it. Okay, off-map movement. Unless specifically allowed in a given game, units cannot conduct any sort of off-map movement. Charts and tables. The map may include various charts and tables to facilitate gameplay. These are sometimes found on separate player aid cards. The turn record track provides a place to keep an accurate record of the current turn. Place the turn record marker, turn, here to show the current turn. So if you open up the Vassal module, you can click this turn track button, and you can see the turn track, and you can see the turn marker on the left here for the first turn. Advance the marker one box each time both players have completed their player turns. The playing pieces. Each game includes one or more counter sheets. There are two main types of counters, units and markers. The units represent the military formations that took part in the battle. The markers are used for record keeping or to note the status of units. The rules. Every Gamer's Brand game contains separate series and game rulebooks. The series rulebook contains the rules generally applicable to all the games in the series. The game rulebook gives the details needed for a specific game, including any special rules, scenarios, and setup information. If the game rules contradict the series rules, the game rules take precedence. Setup notes. Aside from any special notes in the game rules concerning setup, the following are always true. W/I number means to set up a given unit within the stated number of hexes of the hex listed, inclusive. For example, within 4 means a unit could set up in any hex that is 4 or less hexes from the hex given. So to see that on the map, if it specified the startup hex was, let's look at this one for example, let's say it's specified the startup hex was this, but you could set up within 2 of this hex. That means that you could, let me see, click this undo. You could set up here, any of these hexes around it, or any of these other hexes even further away. So that's what within 2 means. Units can never start overstacked, but may be stacked up to the limit. Units generally start at full strength and in supply. When the notation inclusive follows setup boundaries, it means that units may set up anywhere within the given zone, including on the boundary lines. Okay. So I guess the lines would go through a hex, and you can set up on that hex that has the line going through it. The second moving player always sets up first. Cumulative effects. In all cases where a unit is subject to multiple modifiers, the effects are cumulative. A unit halved for terrain and halved for supply in a combat is quartered overall. Retain fractions created by this process until after applying all modifiers. Then use the standard rounding rule. Standard rounding rule. Round fractions as per the following. 0.01 to 0.49 round down, 0.50 to 0.99 round up. Retain fractions until final application. When your opponent tries to pre-calculate combats to hit the 1/2 break, make sure he is following the fog of war rule below. For example, If 3 units attack a single one, you might have 2.5, 3.25, and 4.125, total 9.875, and the defender 2.125 until the odds are determined. At that point, you'll have 9.875 to 2.125, or 4.65 to 1. Now apply the standard rounding rule, which will give you a 5 to 1 attack. What's this here? Unit and marker information. I guess that's what we already... No, I don't think they covered that yet. All right, let's read this. Standard combat series, unit and marker information. This is the number of steps available. This is the unit size, that's a regiment. Unit symbol in the middle here. Lower unit designation. Higher assignment, if any. So I guess that's the parent formation. Exploit capability is the yellow box. Attack strength, defense strength, movement allowance. If there is only one number to the left of the movement allowance instead of two, then it is a combined attack and defense strength. Out of supply marker, turn record marker, unit symbols, infantry, armor, unit size indicators, platoon, company, battalion, Kampfgruppe, group, regiment, brigade, division, corps, army, and army group. Okay, so fog of war. Except when calculating the odds for an attack he has committed to make, a player cannot examine the units comprising an enemy stack. He can observe the stack's top unit only. He may look under any markers that may be covering this top unit. Oh, okay. So you can pull off markers, but you can't pull off the top unit. A player cannot cancel an attack after announcing it. Sequence of play. A game turn is a sequence of steps, the order of which is the sequence of play. Each turn consists of 2 player turns. Each player turn consists of a set sequence. Both players play through their player turn to finish a game turn. At the end of the game turn, advance the turn marker and begin the process again. Players must follow the sequence of play strictly in the order given. The game rulebook identifies who is the first and second player. Each game will have its own variation of the following basic sequence of play. Okay. First player turn. Movement. Place any phasing side reinforcements into the entry hexes called for by the order of arrival. The phasing player can move his units. Phasing units can conduct overrun combat. Combat. Phasing units adjacent to enemy units can attack. Exploitation. Exploitation-capable phasing units can move. They may also overrun. Supply. The phasing player ensures that each of his units are in supply. If not, mark them out of supply. Second player turn. Repeat the above, switching roles with your opponent. Zones of control. Zones of control represent a unit's ability to inhibit enemy movement around it. The zones of control of enemy units are called enemy zones of control, EZOCs. Friendly zones of control have no effect on friendly units. Only units with a printed attack strength, not barrage, supply range, or defense only, of 1 or more have zones of control. A unit's zone of control consists of hexes adjacent to it that it could move into during regular movement. Zone of control effects. Pay 2 additional movement points to enter a hex containing an enemy zone of control. Given the movement points, units can move directly from enemy zone of control to enemy zone of control, and can move into and exit any number of enemy zones of control. Units that begin a phase in an enemy zone of control cannot overrun in that phase. Units that begin the exploitation phase in an enemy zone of control cannot move. Interesting. Okay. So in some other game systems, if you enter an enemy zone of control, you have to immediately stop and cannot move again that turn. So this is a bit of a difference from other systems. A unit can attack only units in its zone of control. Remove one step from a stack that retreats into an enemy zone of control. Retreating stacks lose one step total, not one step per unit. Do this for each enemy zone of control hex retreated into. This is also different from some other systems where I just read another system where if you have to retreat into an enemy zone of control, the entire stack is eliminated. So this is a rule that can vary between systems. Enemy zones of control do not inhibit advance after combat. Enemy zones of control block supply lines. Let's look at this picture. So it's just telling you what a normal zone of control would look like. It's these 6 hexes around it, and then limited by terrain, it's these 3, and it's not these 2 because the unit cannot move directly into that hex, but it can move into this hex. Movement is prohibited across a river hex side. Movement is prohibited across river hex sides except at bridges. The zone of control extends only across the bridge. Got it. Multiple enemy zones of control give no additional effect. Friendly zones of control have no effect on enemy zones of control. A hex can have friendly zones of control and enemy zones of control simultaneously. Friendly units negate enemy zones of control in their hexes for supply purposes only. Movement. During his movement phase, the player can move as many or as few of his units as he wants. He can move each of his units as far as he wants within each unit's movement allowance and any other applicable restrictions. Procedure. The phasing player moves units individually or as stacks, keeping track of their remaining movement allowance by expending movement points. Units must follow a contiguous path through the hex grid. Units can move in any direction or series of directions. The movement of one unit or stack must be completed before starting to move another. How to move units. The player can move all, some, or none of his units. Each unit has a movement allowance, MA. A unit cannot expend more movement points in a single phase than its movement allowance. Exception C3.1e. Calculate movement using movement points, MP. According to the terrain effects chart, each hex or hex side feature costs a special amount of movement points. The player must keep a running total of the number of movement points each unit expends while it moves. Movement allowances are independent, and one unit's expenditures do not affect other units. A unit cannot save unused movement points or transfer them to another unit. A player can always move a unit with a movement allowance greater than 0, 1 hex, regardless of the movement point cost involved. Such movement cannot be through or into prohibitive terrain, nor can it be used to perform an overrun. Simonich has a similar rule in his games called tactical movement, where you can always move. I think it's like 2 hexes, something like that. I guess it depends on the game. Movement allowance modifications, such as from supply and enemy zones of control, have no effect on a unit's ability to use this rule. Although units that begin the exploitation phase in an enemy zone of control still cannot move. Okay, got it. What's this? I guess this would be examples. All right, so let's look at terrain effects on movement. Terrain effects on movement. According to the terrain effects chart, each hex and hex side feature costs movement points. A unit must pay the total movement points required to enter a hex before entering that hex, with the exception of units moving using Rule 3.1e, which is the tactical movement, right? Units may use roads or road-like features, such as railroads, trails, tracks, or bridges, only when following a continuous path along the road to enter a given hex. Such units pay the road movement cost and ignore the movement point costs of the hex entered or hex side crossed. Right. So what they're saying there is like, if you had two roads that were next to each other, let's imagine you had two roads in parallel like these two. If you were to move from this hex to this hex, you don't get the road bonus. You don't get to pay the road movement price because the road is not leading from this hex to that hex, even though both hexes are adjacent and both hexes do contain a road. That's what that rule's saying. A hex side feature crossed that is not negated by a road adds its cost to that of the hex. This is different from some systems where some systems just have you pay the highest cost instead of adding them together. Units cannot enter or cross prohibitive terrain unless negated by roads. And let's look at this movement example here. So I guess we'll look at the terrain effects chart first. Terrain type: in open terrain you pay 1, in woods you pay 2, road you pay a half, stream you add 1 to whatever the underlying terrain is. River, P, is prohibited, and bridge negates river. Oh, okay, right. So the bridge allows you to cross the river, right? So A is attacker. So the combat effect: in open terrain, there's no effect. In woods, the defender is doubled, I guess. On road, other terrain. So you use whatever the other terrain is in the hex to determine the combat effect. With a stream, the attacker is halved. With a river, attacking is prohibited across a river. And with a bridge, the attacker is quartered. Wow, it's brutal. I think in the Simonich system, the attacker is halved, maybe, I think. This terrain effects chart is used for the examples in this series rulebook. Each game will have its own unique terrain effects chart. Okay, and let's look at this movement example. This example shows the movement point costs involved in moving units. The numbers in the circles show the accumulation of movement points expended as a unit enters various hexes. The movement point cost to enter each hex is taken from the terrain effects chart above. So these are the numbers they're talking about, these ones in the beige yellow circles here. Unit 6, which is where, this number here on the left here, is moving in the gap between units 2 and 7. Unit 2 is here, and unit 7 is here. It costs 1 movement point to enter the first open terrain hex, this one here. It costs 2 movement points to enter the second hex. 1 because it's open terrain, and then an additional 1 because you're crossing the stream. It costs 3 movement points to enter hex 24.17. So this is 24, 16, 17. It costs 1 because it's open terrain. It costs an additional 2 because you're entering an enemy zone of control, because this guy's zone of control extends across this bridge. It costs 2 movement points to enter the woods hex 25.18, so this hex right here. And that's because that's the standard cost for woods, entering woods. At this point, Unit 6 could continue on to hex 26.17, that would be this one here, but decides to stay in the safety of the woods. Unit 6 could not continue on to hex 26.18 in the woods because Unit 6 has a movement allowance of 9, and it would cost 2 more movement points to enter hex 26.18. So he spent, up until that point, 1 plus 3 is 4. Oh, and then at this point he spent 6, and when he gets to here, he has spent 8. Right, makes sense. Unit 1, here on the right, spends 3 movement points to enter hex 26.16, so 26.16, this hex right here, which it costs 3 because it's 1 for open terrain, and then 2 to enter an enemy zone of control. It only costs half a movement point to enter hex 26.17, and another half to enter 26.18, because Unit 1 is using the road. Although Unit 1 has 1 movement point remaining upon reaching 26.18, it chooses to not move further. Got it. Where was I? Restrictions on movement. Units cannot enter enemy-occupied hexes. Only friendly units move during a friendly phase. Combat results can force enemy units to retreat. The map edge is a hard boundary. Destroy units that cross it and count them for victory purposes. Stacking. A stack occurs when a hex contains more than 1 unit. Each game will have its own stacking limit. Enforce stacking at each phase's end, at the instant of overrun, and at the end of an advance after combat. In the overrun case, count both overrunning units and any units which just happen to be in the hex. Reinforcements can overstack initially, but these stacks must break up by that phase's end. When stacking is enforced, kill off any excess stacking found in any hex, owning player's choice of units. This always seemed excessive to me. I don't understand the rationale for that. In the case of a stacking check at the moment of overrun, simply put the moving units back into their starting hex and redo their move. Do not kill anything. Units which are overstacked after retreating due to a combat result, overrun or regular combat, do not have to kill off excess stacking until the end of the next friendly movement phase. Okay. Okay. Game markers, out of supply, etc., never affect stacking. Order of stacking. The player can arrange his stacks any way he likes with the following restriction. The top unit in every stack must have an attack strength, not barrage, supply range, or defense only, of 1 or more, if such a unit exists in the stack. Okay, so this is just a rule to prevent people from hiding what's in their stack with non-combat units. Reinforcements. Reinforcements are units that enter after play begins. Procedure. Place reinforcements into their entry hexes at the beginning of their entry turn's movement phase. Place them into the hex containing the entry area designation. If several hexes are given, they may be split up, and start their movement there. Reinforcements always enter supplied. A player cannot delay the entry of reinforcements. Okay. Reinforcements can overstack on placement, provided they split up during that phase. Reinforcement placement does not cost movement points. Reinforcements can use their full movement allowance in their first phase. Enemy zones of control have no effect on reinforcement placement. Do not place reinforcements into hexes containing enemy units. If enemy units block a reinforcement's entry hexes, The reinforcements arrive in any hex at or within 10 hexes along the map edge. Blocking includes surrounding map edge entry hexes in such a way that will result in overstacking losses to the reinforcements. If entry occurs on the map, that is, not on an edge, and the hex is blocked, the units enter anywhere at or within 5 hexes of the intended hex. If entry occurs on the map that is not on an edge, okay, so they're saying like if a scenario specifies that the unit enters somewhere in the middle of the map and that hex is blocked, you can place within 5 hexes of there. Overrun combat. Overrun combat is combined movement and combat. At a 2 movement point cost, units can conduct an overrun attack during the movement or exploitation phases. To overrun as a stack, units must begin movement stacked. Units that begin the phase in an enemy zone of control cannot overrun. Units that overrun can stack adjacent to the target hex with units that are not overrunning, and that hex's stacking total must be within the stacking limit. Adverse combat results only affect the units actually engaged in the overrun. Procedure. The player moves a stack or stack adjacent. The player moves a unit or stack adjacent to the target hex, paying this adjacent hex's terrain cost and any enemy zone of control cost. The units then expend 2 movement points for the overrun. The player calculates the odds, rolls the dice, and applies the results from the combat results table, as in any combat. If all defending units vacate the target hex, the overrunning units must enter it. Resolve overruns like any combat, but resolve them during the movement phase immediately after announcing them. Overruns are not resolved in the defender's hex. At all times, the attacking and defending stacks are in adjacent hexes, just like any combat. Don't know what they mean by resolved in the defender's hex. I'm not sure what that means. More than one stack can never overrun a single target at once. Units can overrun only those target hexes that would cost them 2 or less movement points to enter in regular movement. For this rule, use the target hex's terrain cost only. Ignore enemy zones of control. Restrictions on overruns. Only units allowed to move in the exploitation phase can overrun during that phase. An attacking stack can overrun only once in a phase. A given target hex can only be overrun once in a phase. Units in that hex can be overrun again should they retreat to another, yet to be overrun hex. Units can overrun during the movement phase and attack normally during the combat phase. Properly managed, a unit can attack up to 3 times in a turn. Okay. So I think what this rule means is that you can't, like, if you try to overrun with one stack and it fails, I think that means that you cannot then target that same hex with a different stack. I think that's what that's saying. Supply status has no effect on a unit's ability to overrun, although being out of supply may reduce a unit's movement allowance and attack strength. Units cannot use roads and road-like features to execute overruns. Units can use a road to get to the hex adjacent to the overrun target, but cannot use the road to lessen the cost of the target hex to allow overrun. Units, overrunning and stationary combined, cannot overstack in the overrun attack hex. Okay. All game-specific modifiers air points, combined arms modifiers, etc. apply to overruns like any other combat. Okay. Overrun results. Overrun attackers can advance after combat, but regardless of the result, the overrun ends the regular movement for them. The attacking units must enter or traverse the defender's hex if it becomes vacant during an overrun. Apply any retreat results the attacker gets in an overrun. Okay. Let's look at this example. Overrun example. Units 5 and 6, these ones here, the brown ones, are able to overrun, I guess 14, because Unit 14, this gray one, does not exert an enemy zone of control. It does not have a printed attack strength of 1 or more. Units 5 and 6 can overrun Unit 14, but instead are both going to overrun Unit 7. Where's Unit 7? Oh, here. Okay. They can do this by moving together as a stack to x11.08. So here's 11.5. So they're in 6, 7, 8. So they move up to here. They move there and they declare an overrun. The numbers in the circles show the accumulation of movement points expended by the units in each hex. So they pay 1 to enter this hex and 5 more to enter this hex for a total of 6. Why is it 5 to enter this hex? It's 1 for clear terrain and then 2 for a zone of control. That should be 3 for a total of 4. Oh, and then it's 2 more. Oh, no. Yeah. I don't know why this is 6. Let's see. They spend 5 movement points for hex 11.8 because it costs 1 movement point to enter the hex, 2 movement points to enter Unit 7's enemy zone of control, and 2 more to execute the overrun. Okay, so I had it right. It was just this number also includes the cost of the overrun attack. Assuming no modifiers, the odds of the overrun attack would be 14 to 3, rounding off to 5 to 1. So they have this guy has attack of 7. He has a defense of 3, so that's 14 to 3. And that rounds up. Interestingly enough, that rounds up to 5 to 1. Yeah, the way that this works is the way that the rounding works is very different from other systems. Normally you round down, or at least in the Simonich system, I think you round down. Units 5 and 6 cannot overrun Unit 7 from hex 1007. 5 and 6 cannot overrun Unit 7 from hex 1007. Oh, so they cannot move into this hex because the stacking limit for this example is 6 steps per hex. So he's got 2 steps. That's the number in the yellow. 2 and 2 is 4. This guy has 3, so that's 7. And units 5, 6, and 1 would have a combined total of 7 steps. Although Unit 8, where's Unit 8? Here, can move into hex 908. So this is 10, 9, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's this hex with the red cross. Although Unit 8 can move into hex 9.08, it is not allowed to overrun Unit 7 because road-like features such as the bridge cannot be used to negate the river during an overrun. Oh, I see. Okay. Road-like features. 6.1D. I see. Right. Okay, so that's a crucial rule. Okay, yeah, and it makes sense. Okay. Unit 8 can also move to hex 9.06. So this is 5, 6, so it can move here. But it cannot overrun Unit 2, which is this one down here, the gray unit there, because the movement point cost to enter 9.05, which is this woods hex, in regular movement would be 3 movement points. 2 for the woods and then 1 for the stream. There's 1 woods and then the stream, right? Which is greater than the 2 movement point limit for overruns, Rule 6C. If Unit 8 waits until after Units 5 and 6 have left Hex 11.06, here, it could overrun Unit 14 from there for a total cost of 4 movement points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 have left 11.6. Oh. So this is 11.6. Where these guys start is 11.6. It could overrun Unit 14, this one here. Okay, so what this is saying is that this Unit 8 here on the left could move to this hex and then to this hex and then overrun this unit here. It could overrun Unit 14 from there for a total cost of 4 movement points. Remember, no enemy zone of control for Unit 14. So it would be 1 movement point to enter here, a second movement point to enter here, and then you pay 2 more to conduct the overrun attack. Combat. Combat is the act of attacking one hex. A unit can conduct combat against any enemy-occupied hex in its zone of control. Other than overruns, combat occurs only in the combat phase. Note, in some games, a unit may temporarily lose its zone of control, out of supply or disorganized, but it still has the ability to attack hexes into which it would normally have a zone of control. A player is never forced to attack. Units must defend if attacked. Units within a stack cannot be attacked singly. Stacks always defend together. Units from more than one hex can engage in the attack on a single hex, but only one hex can be the defender. Execute attacks in any desired order. Attacks are announced and resolved one at a time. There is no need to announce all attacks in advance. To announce an attack, the phasing player reveals all the units involved in the attack, and then the defender reveals the defending units. In games where the defender can respond in some way before the attack is resolved, such as allotting air points, the attacker initially need only reveal the number of units attacking from each hex before the defender responds. Got it. Procedure. After announcing the attack, the combat's odds are determined, see below, and the correct odds column on the game's combat results table is found. The phasing player rolls 2 dice. Depending on the game, this roll could be interpreted as either a 2 to 12 or 11 to 66. See the specific combat results table for the version being used. And the idea there is if you add the values of the 2 dice together, that would give you a 2 to 12. If you treat the 2 dice as being 2 digits in the result, first die is the first digit and the second die is the second digit, that would give you 11 to 66. Players read the result and apply it as listed below. Combat results. The combat results table, CRT or combat table, gives results that affect the attacker, A, the defender, D, or both. The possible results are number of steps lost, R number of hexes to be retreated, that's it. A result of A1R1 would mean that the attacker must lose 1 step and retreat 1 hex. The attacking forces must lose a total of 1 step, strongest unit, and all attacking units must retreat 1 hex. Okay, strongest unit, what does that mean? Execute the result immediately upon determining it. After executing it, move on to other combats. The defender always executes his result first. Restrictions on combat. No unit must attack. No unit can ever divide its strength between more than one combat. Any number of units can attack in a single attack, and attacks can be made from any direction or set of directions. While no individual unit in a stack can divide its attack, stacks always can. Stacks can divide their attacks, got it. In other words, units stacked together could attack different hexes, but no single unit can contribute to more than one attack. Attack all units in a hex as a single defense strength. The defender cannot withhold units in a hex from a combat. Units can attack or be attacked only once in a combat phase. Units that retreat to another yet-to-be-attacked hex will not participate in that combat. I see. So if you attack one hex and the units there retreat, and they retreat to another hex that is also going to be attacked that phase, the unit that retreated doesn't get to add its defense strength. Only the original units in the hex defend, yet any and all adverse combat results apply to the entire stack. Units can make only one overrun attack in a phase. Units which overrun are eligible to attack in the regular combat phase as well. Units with a printed attack strength of 0 can participate in an attack with other non-zero units. While they add nothing in the way of attack strength, such units can help absorb step losses and advance after combat. Units without an actual printed attack strength, such as barrage, supply range, or defense only, cannot participate in an attack. Terrain effects on combat. Combat into or across certain terrain types, as listed on the terrain effects chart, is prohibited. Furthermore, units cannot attack into terrain they might not otherwise be able to move into from their current hex. Generally, terrain modifies attacking and defending combat strengths as a multiplier. A stack defending in a certain terrain type might be x2, meaning multiply that stack's defense strength by 2. Terrain affects only those units that are subject to a condition. Say 3 units are attacking across a stream and 1 isn't. The 3 would be halved, and the last one would be normal. Usually only the terrain, so what they're saying is that, what that rule is saying is you don't apply a terrain effect to any units that are not moving to or from that terrain, right? Usually only the terrain of the defender's hex and the hex sides between the attackers and the defender affect combat. Alternatively, terrain could shift the final combat odds to a column. So alternatively, the terrain could shift the final combat odds column instead of affecting the actual strength of the units. Odds determination. To determine the combat odds, compare the total modified attack strength with the total modified defense strength. Divide both numbers by the smaller number of the two. Apply the rounding rule to the results of the divisions and express the two numbers as a ratio, attacker to defender. Odds columns are limited to those printed on the table. Resolve attacks at odds greater than the table's rightmost column on the rightmost column. When called for, column shifts for such attacks also start from the rightmost column. There are no imaginary columns to the right of the rightmost column. Attacks found to be at odds less than the leftmost column incur the following. The attacker loses 1 step and the defender is unaffected. Do not roll on the table. This rule also applies to attacks which are shifted off the combat results table's left side. Note to experienced gamers. The implications of the standard rounding rule on odds should be clear. This is far from the usual round in favor of the defender rule. For examples, 3 to 4 is 1 to 1. 5 to 2 is 3 to 1. 9 to 6 is 2 to 1. And 11 to 8 is 1 to 1. Step losses. Steps allow a unit to take damage in increments. The unit's side displayed shows a unit's current strength. Most units have a full and a reduced strength side. Full strength units that take a step loss are flipped over and become reduced strength. Reduced strength units which take a step loss are destroyed and removed from play. Note that the unit's sides have differing strengths. The full strength side is the stronger of the two. Further step losses can be shown by the placement of a step loss marker under the reduced strength unit. These additional step losses do not affect the unit's strength. Step loss marker. Haven't seen that. Okay. When a result calls for a step loss, the first step lost must be from the side's strongest unit. The strongest unit being that with the highest printed attack strength for the attacker, or the highest printed defense strength for the defender. All units in a particular combat must absorb one step loss before any single unit of them absorbs two. Given 8A and 8B, the owning player is free to distribute step losses among any units he wants, provided they were actually involved in the combat. Step losses beyond the absorption capacity of a side are ignored. Some units have only one step. These units have printing on only one side. A single step loss eliminates any such unit. Okay, let's look at the examples. Example of combat, part 1. In the example above, 4 of the friendly units, 3 here, 4 here, 6 here, and 8 here, are to attack units 7 here and 14 here. The total attack strength is 18. 7 plus 3 is 10. 5 plus 3 is 8. 8 plus 10 is 18. The defense strength is 4, because this guy defends at 1, and these guys defend at 3. The odds are then 5 to 1. 18 to 4, I guess rounds, it's closer to, I guess it rounds up, because it's like, what would that be, 4.5, 4.5, which rounds up to 5. 2 dice are rolled on the combat results table. With a given roll, the result on the game's 5 to 1 column is D2R2. Units 7 and 14 have 2 steps each. The owning player takes 1 step from each defending unit, must take 1 step from each defending unit. The owner declines to lose any steps in order to reduce the retreat requirement, and then retreats the units 2 hexes. This results in the situation at right here. So they've each taken 1 step loss, so the number in the yellow circle went from 2 to 1, and they moved back 2 hexes. At this point, the 2 units have retreated into Unit 1 here, 1's zone of control, and the player chooses to kill Unit 7 here to satisfy the step loss required for retreating into an enemy zone of control. Unit 3 here has advanced after combat to hold the original combat hex. Okay. It can go no further because it is not exploitation capable. Unit 6, however, is, and has advanced the full 2 hexes allowed by the combat result. In the ensuing exploitation phase, Unit 6 will be eligible to move because Unit 14 does not have an enemy zone of control. because it does not have an attack factor. If Unit 6 had advanced into a hex which did contain an enemy zone of control, it would lose the ability to use the exploitation phase. Example of combat part 3. In this case, Units 8 here, 6 here, and 4 here are attacking 7 here. Unit 3 here cannot attack because of the river. And Units 4 here and 6 are quartered because they are attacking across a bridge, giving them a total attack strength of 2.5 because they have 10 quartered to 2.5. Unit 8 here has its full attack strength of 3, bringing the attacker total to 5.5. The defender is worth 6 because its defense strength is doubled due to being in a woods hex. The odds are 5.5 to 6, or 1 to 1. In a fit of misfortune, the player rolls a 2 on the dice, giving an A2R1 result. The attacking units lose 2 steps and retreat to the 2 hexes marked R here, ending the combat. Even though Unit 6 here contributed only 1.75 points to the attack, the first step loss must come off of it because it has the highest printed attack strength. The other step loss can come off either Unit 4 or 8. The defender cannot advance after combat. Got it. Retreats. Retreats are given as the number of hexes the affected unit must retreat. Unless using the no retreat option, 9.2 below, all of a side's units in a combat must retreat that number of hexes. Right. Units can only retreat into or through hexes that the units could move through during movement. Units which cannot retreat or continue their retreat for this reason must lose 1 step per retreat hex the stack cannot do. The owning player selects the unit or units that take these losses. Note, that is 1 step from the stack, not per unit for each hex not retreated. Retreat is always given in hexes, not movement points. Except where prohibitive terrain prevents retreat, terrain has no effect on the retreat's length. Any hex containing an enemy zone of control, friendly units do not negate this, which a retreating unit enters during its retreat, costs the retreating unit 1 step. This loss is in addition to the combat result itself. A stack must lose 1 step total per enemy zone of control hex entered. The owning player chooses the unit to lose this step. Retreating units can stay together as a stack or retreat using separate paths. Okay. Retreat's path. The owning player retreats his own units. Each retreat path hex must be farther away from the unit's original hex than the last. For example, the second hex retreated is 2 hexes away from the combat hex. Okay. If possible, the unit must retreat toward a supply source. If possible, the unit may avoid hexes containing an enemy zone of control. When determining a retreat path, a unit may avoid enemy zones of control, even if doing so violates Rule 9.c. Okay, so in order to avoid an enemy zone of control, you could move away from a supply source. No retreat option. When the combat results table calls for 1 or more retreat hexes, the owning player can opt to convert any retreat amount into step losses on a 1 step per 1 hex basis. Therefore, if the defender suffers an R3 result, he may opt for any of the following: Retreat 3, no step loss; Retreat 2, 1 step loss; Retreat 1, 2 step losses; or no retreat, 3 step losses. The owning player can choose any combination of retreat hexes and step losses to fulfill his retreat result, provided the total equals the table's retreat result. Again, step losses affect single units. Retreat hexes affect the entire force involved in the combat. And this is in contrast to the Simonich system, where you can do something called determined defense. I think only some units may be able to do determined defense. And that allows you to ignore retreat results, but you have to do a roll to see if it succeeds. And yeah. Advance after combat. Anytime an attack causes the defender's hex to become vacant, attacking units can occupy the hex. The attacking player chooses which units, if any, he wants to advance with. If the defender retreats further than 1 hex, only exploit-capable units can advance as many hexes as the defender's retreat result. Note that even if the defender expends step losses to cover part of his retreat result, the advance after combat is equal to the original result. The defender's original hex must be the first advance hex. After entering that hex, advancing units can go anywhere. They can split up or stay together, except for hexes containing enemy units or prohibitive terrain. While advancing after combat, units ignore enemy zones of control. I wonder what the justification for that is. Any unit involved in the combat can advance after combat. Involved meaning it contributed at least a 0 attack strength to the combat. Okay. Only exploitation-capable units, however, can advance more than 1 hex. The stacking limit must be followed at the end of any advance. If the combat destroys the defender, leaving an unfulfilled retreat result, the attacker can advance the retreat result's number of hexes. Okay. Calculate advances as retreats by number of hexes, not movement points. The defender cannot advance after combat. Attacking units must advance into or through the defender's hex if it becomes vacant during an overrun attack. Exploitation. The exploitation phase allows friendly units that are specified as exploitation capable to move up to their full movement allowance. They may also conduct overrun attacks during this phase. Generally, only units with a yellow box around their unit values are exploit capable. The game rules can define conditions that allow other units access to the exploitation phase. A unit that is in an enemy zone of control at the exploitation phase's beginning cannot move or overrun in the exploitation phase. I wonder what the justification for that is. Units which are not exploit capable or not otherwise allowed access to the exploitation phase cannot apply 3.1e to move. Okay, don't remember what 3.1e is. Let's see. 3.1e. Oh, that's the tactical movement. Units which are not exploit capable cannot use tactical movement to move. Sure. Supply. Standard Combat Series games simulate supply in an abstract trace manner. Individual games vary in the exact manner of handling supply. Procedure. During the supply phase, the phasing player checks each of his units to determine if a supply line trace exists. If a trace is not possible, he marks the unit with an out of supply marker. If, in a later supply phase, a supply line trace exists for such units, the owning player removes the out of supply marker. Tracing supply lines. A supply line trace is a path free of enemy units and enemy zones of control between each unit and the side's supply source. Generally, supply line traces may be any contiguous hex length. The game rules list the supply source for each side. Impassable terrain, hexes or hex sides, enemy units, and non-negated enemy zones of control block supply line traces. If the path used is not blocked, a supply trace is possible. If the path is blocked and no other unblocked path is available, the player may check any potential path, mark the unit out of supply. Okay. The owning player checks each unit or stack for a supply line trace independently. After a successful trace, units are in supply until the next supply phase, regardless of changing circumstances. Conversely, out-of-supply units must wait until at least the next supply phase to qualify as being in supply. So this is another difference from the Simonage system, where the Simonage system has an overland portion. So you have a limited number of hexes that you can get to a road, and then that road has to trace back to a friendly board edge. And I think that's a better system, because what I don't like about these systems is that, as the guy says, that it can be of, like, there's no limit on how long that trace can be, which is, I can see situations where it could be kind of gamey. So I like the Simonage system better, and I don't see why you couldn't just adapt, you couldn't just, graft that way of doing it onto this game. So it might be a way to improve this system. Out-of-supply effects. The game rules specify the out-of-supply effects. A unit is subject to the out-of-supply effects from the moment it receives a marker until it is removed or the unit is destroyed. Supply line trace. Okay, let's look at this. Shown here is the supply line trace available to our heroes, units 3, 6, and 8. 3 is here, 6 is here, 8 is this one. To be in supply, there must be a supply trace between the good guys and supply source B here. The possible trace is marked by the dotted line. Units 6 and 8 negate the enemy zones of control in their hexes for supply purposes. Here we go, these ones. Which allows Unit 3 to trace. Got it. Likewise, Unit 8 negates an enemy zone of control for Unit 6. Right. Note that if the bridge or either Unit 6 or 8 were not present, Unit 3 would be out of supply and marked with an out of supply marker. This guy here. Right, makes sense. Hex control. Control of a hex is often important for determining victory or other game functions. A player can gain control of a hex by having one of his units occupy or pass through the hex. A zone of control is not sufficient to gain control of a hex. Hex control can change back and forth during the course of a game. In some games, the term hold, capture, or take may be used instead of control. Oh, and that's the end of the rules. So the rest is just designer's notes. Designer's notes. This series was designed for two reasons. First, it was meant to offset our other series, which by an order of magnitude are much more complicated than the standard combat series. Second, it was designed to be a basic read fun game, which can be played at times when the others seem like too much of a good thing. These games are made for the break out the beer and pretzels and here we go type of evening. While none of our games are designed with the beginner as their raison d'etre, the standard combat series was designed as something the beginner would be able to handle, as opposed to being devoured by. I want to make the reasons behind a few things in this series known. First of all is our standard rounding rule. I have been forever pained by the 11 to 6. Oh, I'm so sorry. That's only a 1-to-1 attack. More importantly, watching players scrounge the map looking for a strength point or two to make the odds break is downright embarrassing. By making the table break happen at the half value, I hope to make players spend less time pre-calculating and more time just shooting from the hip. It's the shoot from the hip gunfight that is fun in wargaming, not the ravings of the accountant gone mad looking for each individual strength point. If your opponent starts to pre-calculate combats in this system, even after making it tougher on him, feel free to slap him silly. Sure, he can start scrounging for enough points to make that last 0.5, but only if you let him dodge around the fog of war rule. And also, I played with someone who had a very good way of handling this issue of the CRT having limited, resolution, where you just roll a D10 along with your D6, and you use that D10 as the probability of getting the additional, whether you're on the choosing the column that you're on. I don't have an example available, but it would, you can kind of imagine if you had like a 4.4 to 1 attack, you would roll the d10, and if you got a 4 or a 1 to a 4, it would be a 4 to 1, and if you got no, how would it be? It would be if you got a 1 to a 4, I think it would be a 4 to 1, and if it's the other ones, it's a 5 to 1. No, I think it's the other way around. Yeah, I think it's if you got a 1 to a 4, it would be a 5 to 1, and if it was a 5 to a 10, that would be a 4 to 1. So that was a good way of handling that. Anyway, quite a few people seem to think our standard rounding rule is an attempt at limited intelligence. It isn't. The fog of war rule is the limited intelligence part of this game. The standard rounding rule merely represents a different way of expressing what happens to the remainder in odds and other expressions. Another very carefully set up set of rules involves the determination of who gets to exploit and who doesn't, specifically the effect of enemy zones of control on the matter. Because of the enemy zone of control restriction, the development and use of reserves is rewarded. A player must be aware of his units. He cannot assume that just because a unit is mechanized, it will be able to function in the exploitation phase. Likewise, units are also restricted in their ability to overrun if they begin movement in an enemy zone of control. The assumption here is that units in contact with the enemy will not have the ability to quickly disengage, reconsolidate, and plan future movements so as to take advantage of fleeting opportunities. Units in a safe reserve location can, and it's those units which I feel should be allowed to overrun and use the exploitation phase. It's interesting because other games, they'll have like an engaged result. So that's like, I think Simonich also has an engaged result. And so that's a status that exists for units, which would seem to address this question. These version 1.8 rules can be used directly with any of the games in the series. It reflects a continual process of refinement and correction, which will make each of our series rules the best they can possibly be. Players all over the world have added their voice here to make these rules and the system better by pointing out weak points and errors. For them and their effort, we are grateful. And that's it. Those are the rules.